She walked into that mall with $186 in her pocket, a Christmas gift on her mind, and absolutely no idea she would never walk back out. For nearly 4 decades, the person who took her life moved through the world raising a family, running a business, attending neighborhood cookouts while an entire city quietly carried the weight of an unsolved crime. This is the story of Michelle Martinko, and the extraordinary chain of science, stubbornness, and sheer refusal to forget that finally brought her justice. Welcome back to Cold Case Vault, the channel dedicated to cold cases that refuse to stay buried. If this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button, drop a comment below, and ring the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Let's get into it. Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Population, 110,000. Date, December 19th, 1979. It was the kind of Midwestern winter night that sets in hard, pitch dark by 6, temperatures that bite through your coat before you reach the car. Michelle Martinko was 18 years old, a senior at Jefferson High School. Tall, striking, long blonde hair that turned heads without her even trying, and her choir had just wrapped up their end-of-year banquet. It was a night for celebration. Afterward, Michelle did what a lot of young people in Cedar Rapids were doing that December. She headed to Westdale Mall. The place had only opened 2 months earlier. It was the destination. Brand new, buzzing, the kind of spot that pulled every teenager within driving distance on a Friday night. Michelle had a specific errand. Her mother had placed a coat on layaway as a Christmas gift. Michelle planned to pay it off. She had the cash with her to do it. But when she got to the store, she changed her mind about the purchase and decided to hold off. Her friend Tracy Price spotted her inside the mall that evening. He noticed her holding a visible amount of money and pulled her aside. "Put that away," he told her. "Don't be flashing cash out here in front of everybody." Michelle thanked him. They parted ways. What Tracy didn't learn until later was that Michelle had been uneasy that night, nervous about being at the mall alone, and telling at least one person she felt as though someone was following her. The mall closed at 10 o'clock. She walked out into the dark. The next morning, Cedar Rapids woke up to a city it no longer recognized. Michelle Martinko had been found in the front seat of her car, a Buick, parked in the outer lot of Westdale Mall. She had been attacked with extraordinary violence. 29 stab and cut wounds covered her body. The defensive wounds on her hands told investigators exactly what kind of fight she had put up. She did not go quietly. Retired Detective Harvey Denlinger, one of the original investigators on the scene, would later say that in all his years of law enforcement, he had never encountered anything like it. The cash was still in the car. Her bags from the mall were still in the back seat. Nothing had been taken. This was not a robbery. Cedar Rapids was stunned. "If that could happen and the person wasn't caught," said Mike Wyrick, a classmate who had briefly dated Michelle, "anything could happen." The city's sense of safety, that quiet, Midwestern confidence that serious violence happened somewhere else, shattered overnight. Every officer in Cedar Rapids was pulled in. The case consumed the department. Investigators combed through Michelle's life looking for someone with motive. The person who had attacked her had brought rubber gloves. Investigators found indentations from those gloves pressed into the dirt on the outside of the car and in the blood on the inside. Whoever did this came prepared. Whoever did this intended to leave no trace. There were no fingerprints, no witnesses, and DNA technology, which would eventually crack the case wide open, was still years from being used in criminal investigations. Michelle's personal life was examined in detail. She had dated a young man named Andy Seidel. He was a year older, 17, when they started seeing each other. Friends described him as flashy, possessive. When Michelle ended the relationship, he reportedly struggled to accept it. He wanted to know her every move, who she was spending time with, why. Police learned that Andy had run into Michelle at the mall on the night she was killed. He was brought in for questioning. Andy had an alibi. He was home shortly after the mall closed, confirmed by his mother. Investigators weren't entirely convinced. As one detective later noted, mothers will say a great deal to protect their children. But there was no physical evidence pointing to Andy Seidel. None. Mike Wyrick, who had also dated Michelle but was more than 100 miles away at college during the attack, was questioned as well. Investigators even laid crime scene photographs on the table in front of him during the interview. He found it deeply distressing. He was never considered a serious suspect. Andy Seidel left Cedar Rapids after graduating. He joined the Navy. A significant portion of the community remained quietly convinced he was responsible. By the mid-1980s, the leads had dried up. The case went cold. "We truly had given up hope," said Janelle Stonebreaker, Michelle's older sister, who was 12 years her senior. Before we go further, it's worth understanding what Michelle meant to the people who raised her. Her mother, Janet Martinko, had endured 5 miscarriages before Michelle was born. Janet was 44 years old at the time. Michelle was, in every real sense, a miracle. At 12, Michelle was diagnosed with scoliosis, a curvature of the spine severe enough to require a brace from her neck to her hips. It was a painful, self-conscious period in her adolescence. She felt different, set apart. At 14, she was able to shed the brace. And then, as her sister Janelle describes it, everything changed. The Farrah Fawcett era was in full swing, and Michelle leaned into it. The long blonde hair, the confidence, the warmth. She was blissfully unaware of the attention she attracted, Janelle recalled. Her parents never saw the case resolved. They went to their graves not knowing the truth, and, according to Andy Seidel himself, likely believing he was the person responsible. Andy was a victim himself, Detective Doug Larison would later say. Many fingers were pointing at him. 2 decades after Michelle's murder, Detective Doug Larison was assigned to revisit the case. Larison had gone to high school with Michelle, not close friends, but close enough that her unsolved murder had never fully left him. He felt a sense of accountability toward his classmates. He wanted to solve it. It was now 2005. DNA analysis had transformed criminal investigation. Larison went back to the original evidence files and discovered something remarkable buried in the paperwork. At some earlier point, another investigator had sent blood scrapings from the gear shift of Michelle's car to a lab for testing. The results had come back, and then they had sat in the file, unread, for years. The report confirmed male DNA on the gear shift. The attacker had almost certainly cut himself during the assault. His blood had mixed with Michelle's at the point of the struggle. Larison then sent Michelle's dress, stored for decades in an evidence locker, to the lab. The results came back with a full male DNA profile on a spot of blood on the fabric. It matched the DNA from the gear shift. "Common sense says that's probably your killer right there," Larison said. The next step was finding a match. The DNA profile was submitted to CODIS, the national database of DNA collected from individuals arrested for serious crimes. The search returned nothing. No match. So investigators began collecting DNA voluntarily from everyone who had ever been connected to the case. Over 100 people. Friends, classmates, former boyfriends, acquaintances. Tracy Price, negative. Mike Wyrick, negative. Andy Seidel, negative. Andy Seidel, the man Cedar Rapids had quietly suspected for nearly 3 decades, was formally cleared. The woman his parents had assumed was his victim's family, Michelle's own mother and father, had died still believing otherwise. Lead investigator Larison, after years of dead ends, eventually stepped back from the case. "I was burned out," he admitted. He asked his supervisors to bring in someone else. That someone was Matt Denlinger. Matt was Harvey Denlinger's son, Harvey being the detective who had stood at that crime scene on the morning of December 20th, 1979, when Matt was 5 years old. Every year after that, the local news ran a segment on the anniversary of Michelle's death. Matt grew up knowing the case, the name, the weight of it. Now he was the one carrying the file. The year was 2015. Matt Denlinger took over as lead detective on the Martinko case, 36 years after his father had first worked the scene. DNA science had advanced again. This time, investigators reached out to Parabon Nanolabs in Virginia, a company specializing in DNA phenotyping, the process of reconstructing physical characteristics from a genetic sample. What came back was striking. Their snapshot composite indicated the suspect was likely a white male with blonde hair and blue eyes. A press conference was held. Composite images, multiple versions accounting for different ages and hairstyles, were released to the public. Hundreds of tips flooded in. None of them panned out. Then, in 2018, a case on the opposite side of the country changed everything. Joseph DeAngelo, the so-called Golden State Killer, was arrested in California, charged with a decades-long campaign of murder and assault. The breakthrough in that case came through genetic genealogy, the process of building a DNA family tree by connecting a crime scene sample to distant relatives who had voluntarily submitted their own DNA to ancestry databases. Matt Denlinger read the coverage and immediately recognized the implications. Parabon was already holding Michelle's DNA sample. Denlinger called them. "We'll use what you already gave us," they said. In July of 2018, the results came back. Parabon had found a match in GEDmatch, a public genealogy database where individuals voluntarily upload their own DNA to trace family ancestry. The match was a woman named Brandy Jennings, an office manager and single mother living in Vancouver, Washington. Brandy Jennings was not the suspect. She was a second cousin, once removed, of the person whose DNA was found on Michelle Martinko's clothing and car. But she was the thread. Denlinger spent months constructing a full family tree stretching back to Brandy's great-great-grandparents using birth records, marriage records, cemetery records, every genealogical document he could access. Other members of the extended family submitted DNA voluntarily. The picture gradually filled in. Eventually, Parabon recalibrated the data and came back with a focused result. 3 brothers, all living in Iowa, all sharing DNA consistent with the evidence from the case. Their names were Donald Burns, Kenneth Burns, and Jerry Burns. Cedar Rapids was 20 minutes away from where all 3 lived. Denlinger had to collect DNA from each brother without alerting any of them. In a state as connected as Iowa, one wrong conversation could compromise everything. The team followed the first brother to lunch and retrieved his used drinking straw. For the second, a discarded toothbrush pulled from the rubbish outside his home. For Jerry Burns, the third brother, they tracked him to a pizza restaurant in Manchester, Iowa. He ordered at least 2 sodas. He used a straw each time. All 3 samples were sent to the lab. Donald Burns, not a match. Kenneth Burns, not a match. Jerry Burns, exact match. "I was speechless," Denlinger said. "I'm almost speechless today just thinking about it." Jerry Burns was not who anyone expected. No criminal record. No connection to Michelle Martinko that investigators could find. No connection to the Buick she was driving that night. A married man with 3 adult children. A respected businessman in his community. The Parabon composite, when placed beside photographs of a younger Jerry Burns, bore a striking resemblance. Denlinger chose a specific date for the interview. December 19th, 2018. Exactly 39 years, to the day, after Michelle Martinko was killed. With a camera concealed inside a coffee mug, Denlinger sat across from Burns at his place of business. "The reality is we have your DNA at the crime scene," Denlinger told him. "We know you were there that night." "How would your DNA get there, Jerry?" Burns said he didn't know. He acknowledged that he and his family had visited Westdale Mall in the past. He could not recall specific visits or dates. When Denlinger pressed harder, "Jerry, what happened that night?" Burns said he didn't know. But notably, he never denied being there. He spoke about traumatic events, about blocking things out. Something like that. "It's possible. I'm sure something like that would be possible." Denlinger's assessment. "The second he refused to deny it or give me a plausible explanation, my gut told me we had the right guy." Burns was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. In the police vehicle on the way back to Cedar Rapids, a camera continued to roll. Burns made comments about blocking out memories of traumatic events. February 2020. More than 4 decades after the attack, Michelle Martinko's accused killer finally faced a courtroom. The buzz surrounding the case in Cedar Rapids was so significant that the presiding judge granted a venue change to Davenport, Iowa, roughly an hour away. The prosecution's case hinged almost entirely on DNA. A 1 in 100 billion chance. Prosecutor Nick Maybanks told the jury that the genetic material belonged to anyone other than Jerry Burns. The defense argued secondary transfer, the idea that Burns's DNA could have reached the car or the dress indirectly, through contact at a shared location like a mall food court. Jerry's brother Don noted that Jerry had previously worked at a dealership that sold Buick vehicles, raising the possibility, however remote, that his DNA could have been present in the car that way. Detective Denlinger addressed that directly. Did the dress go to the Buick dealership too? The defense also called a molecular biologist who testified that DNA transfer scenarios, while unusual, were scientifically possible. The prosecution called a jailhouse witness, Michael Allison, a fellow inmate who said Burns had told him that no matter what happened, he wins because he had spent all those years free with his family. Allison also testified that Burns told him, during a card game, that if Allison kept beating him, he would have to take him to the mall. Allison said he was so disturbed by the comment that he came forward voluntarily. Andy Seidel took the stand as well, cleared by science, but still carrying decades of sideways glances. He testified calmly that he and Michelle had grown apart naturally, and there had been no animosity between them. The jury began deliberating on a Monday afternoon. 3 hours later, they returned. Guilty. First-degree murder. "We almost couldn't breathe," said Janelle Stonebreaker. "It was just amazing." Harvey Denlinger, the detective who stood at that parking lot crime scene in 1979, who watched his son take over the same investigation 36 years later, was still alive to hear the verdict. "I'm proud as anything," he said. Michelle Martinko never made it to graduation. She never paid for that coat. She never got to find out what her life would have looked like on the other side of 18. But in the end, she played a direct role in her own case. She fought back. She fought hard enough that her attacker cut himself. He left his DNA behind. And 4 decades later, that DNA told the truth. It's not about how she died, prosecutor Nick Maybank said at trial. It's about how she lived. Michelle Martinko remembered. A footnote: after Burns's arrest, Detective Denlinger revealed that during the interview, Burns had unprompted mentioned a name, Jody Husentrud, a blonde news anchor who was taken from a parking lot near her car in Mason City, Iowa in 1995 and never found. Burns lived roughly 2 hours from Mason City. No evidence currently connects him to that disappearance, and Mason City authorities have not publicly confirmed whether Burns is a focus of that investigation. That's the Michelle Martinko case. And if this story moved you, hit the like button. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people who care about these cases. Drop a comment below. What part of this investigation stood out most to you? The DNA genealogy breakthrough? The 40-year timeline? Let me know. Subscribe to Cold Case Vault for new uploads every week. Cold cases, missing persons, and the investigators who refuse to let them fade. See you in the next one. Script: Cold Case Vault. All rights reserved. Based on publicly available court records and broadcast journalism. No copyrighted material reproduced.